Hello, and welcome back to Angelica's Morbid Minutes. I'm Angelica, your witness to the stories that silence tried to keep buried. Before we begin, I need you to know this episode is different. This episode includes discussion of stalking, harassment, threats, coercive behavior, alleged predatory behavior, and the emotional impact of being repeatedly contacted after saying no. Please take care while listening. I also need to be clear about the framing. I'm speaking from my own lived experience. When I talk about what happened to me, I'm telling you what I personally experienced and what I remember. When I reference other people's accounts, I will do that carefully, based on what has been shared with me or said publicly. I'm not here to speak for anyone who has not chosen to speak for herself. This episode is not a court proceeding. It is not a conviction. It is not a diagnosis. It is my story. And it is about the pattern I recognized once other people started speaking to. Most of the time, when I cover a case, I'm telling you about someone else. A missing person, a victim, a family, a community left with questions. But this time, part of the story is mine. I was 19 years old when Jon Holyoke came into my life. I've carried that sentence for a long time. For years, I made it smaller. I called it weird. I called it uncomfortable. I told myself I was young, naive, and maybe I just didn't know how to handle it. But I know now that what happened to me mattered. And I know now that saying no should have been enough. I met Jon on MeetMe. I was 19, I was in college. I was still figuring out who I was, what attention meant, what red flags looked like, and how to trust myself when something felt wrong. At first, it was just talking. That is part of why it took me so long to understand it clearly. It didn't start with something I could easily point to and say, "This is dangerous." It started like a lot of online conversations start. Messages, interest, small talk, a person wanting more of my time. Then, within only a few days, it changed. He started getting pushy. He wanted to meet up. He wanted things to move faster than I was comfortable with. He wanted access to me that I had not agreed to give him. So I told him no. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. After I said no, he started blowing up my phone. He left horrible voicemails. He called over and over, sometimes what felt like 100 times a day. If I didn't answer right away, he accused me of being with other men. I was not dating him. I was not in a relationship with him. I had not promised him anything. But somehow, I was being treated like I owed him access to me. And that changes something in you. Your phone stops feeling like your phone. It becomes something you dread looking at. Every vibration makes your stomach drop. Every missed call feels like proof that your boundary did not matter to this person. I blocked him on social media. Then he made another account and found me again. That became the cycle. I would block him, things would go quiet for a while, and I would start to believe maybe it was finally done. Maybe he had moved on. Maybe I could breathe. Then he would come back. A new account, a new attempt, another reminder that silence did not mean it was over. And that went on for years. Not days, not one bad interaction, years. For almost 10 years, this followed me. It only started to change about 3 years ago when I began posting public warnings about him. I didn't do that because I wanted attention. I did it because I was tired. Tired of blocking, tired of being found again, tired of wondering when he was going to show back up. Tired of feeling like I was the one who had to keep moving around someone who would not leave me alone. And for a long time, I blamed myself for not handling it differently. I told myself I should have known better. I told myself maybe I should have been firmer, or saved more, or explained it better, or taken it more seriously sooner. But I was 19, and I want to say that plainly, because 19 is young. 19 is young enough to know something feels wrong, but not always old enough to know how to name it. 19 is young enough to feel scared and still wonder if you're overreacting. 19 is young enough to say no and then question yourself when that no is ignored. I do not question it anymore. What happened was not okay. Being called over and over after saying no was not okay. Being accused of being with other men when I did not owe him anything was not okay. Being found again after I blocked him was not okay. And I am done making it sound smaller than it was just because it's uncomfortable to say out loud. The hardest part is that for years, I thought this was just mine, my weird story, my uncomfortable memory, my thing from when I was 19. Then, other women started talking. Some described contact across different platforms. Some described blocking him and seeing him return another way. Some described being young when they first became aware of him. Some described changing accounts, warning others, or feeling like they had to manage their own safety around him. I'm not here to tell their stories for them, but I can tell you what it felt like to hear them. It felt familiar, too familiar. And that is when I started looking at my own experience differently. Because when one person says, "This happened to me," people can dismiss her. They can say she misunderstood. They can say she's being dramatic. They can say it was years ago. They can say, "Why talk about it now?" But when multiple people start describing the same kind of behavior, you stop asking whether you were overreacting. You start asking how many people have been carrying this. That is why I'm doing this episode. Not because it's easy, not because I want my name tied to his. I don't. I'm doing this because I was 19, I said no, and he didn't stop. I'm doing this because I spent years minimizing something that affected me so deeply. And I'm doing this because if other people are recognizing pieces of their own story in mine, then maybe silence was never protecting us. It was only keeping us separate. For a long time, I treated what happened to me like something I had survived by myself. I didn't think of it as a bigger story. I thought of it as something from my past, something uncomfortable, something I didn't want to keep explaining, something I had learned to live around. And honestly, I think that's what a lot of people do when something like this happens to them. You move around it. You block. You ignore. You change what you post. You warn people close to you when you have to. You tell yourself it's handled because you don't know what else to do with it. But then, other women started saying his name. and I heard things I recognized. Not every detail was the same. I want to be clear about that. Every person's experience belongs to them, and I am not going to sit here and speak for women who are not here telling their own stories. But I can speak to what I recognized. I recognized the persistence, the accounts, the contact across platforms, the feeling of trying to get distance from someone who kept finding another way back in. I recognized the way women talked about being tired, not just scared, tired. Tired of blocking, tired of checking accounts, tired of explaining the history behind one message, tired of feeling like they were the ones responsible for keeping themselves safe from someone who would not just stop. That part hit me hard because I knew that feeling exactly. When you're the one being contacted, you become the person who has to carry the whole story. You have to remember the timeline. You have to explain why this account matters. You have to explain why a name showing up again is not random. You have to explain why your body reacted before you even had time to think. And if you can't explain it perfectly, people start picking at the pieces. Why didn't you block him sooner? Why didn't you report it? Why did you answer? Why did you wait? Why are you talking about it now? Those questions sound simple from the outside. They are not simple when you're living it. Because when it's happening, especially when you're young, you're not thinking like an investigator. You're thinking like a person who just wants it to stop. You want the phone to stop ringing. You want the account to stop appearing. You want the messages to stop. You want the dread to stop. You want to feel like your life belongs to you again. And then, when you hear another woman describe that same kind of dread, something inside you shifts. There's relief because you're not alone. And there is anger because you are never the only one. That anger is hard to explain. It's not just anger for yourself. It is anger for every person who had to change how they existed because of him. Every person who blocked and got found again. Every person who warned someone else quietly. Every person who wondered if saying something publicly would make it worse. It is anger that the burden kept landing on the people trying to get away. I've seen people talk about him trying to contact them across different platforms. I've seen women say they changed accounts because of him. I've seen people describe feeling uncomfortable, pressured, watched, or worn down. I've seen women connect with each other because the same name kept showing up in too many stories. Again, I'm not here to turn someone else's experience into my script. But I am here to say that those accounts made me look at my own experience differently. Because for years, I treated what happened at 19 like it was just something I had to get over. Then I realized other people had been trying to get away too. And that's what matters. It matters because when women warn each other, people love to call it drama. They say it's messy. They say it's attention-seeking. They say it's old news. They say, why bring this up now? But warnings do not come from nowhere. A woman does not usually want to attach her name to something painful. She does not usually want to explain the most humiliating, frightening, or confusing parts of her past to strangers. She does not usually want to risk being judged just to tell people someone made her feel unsafe. Most of the time, she speaks because staying quiet started feeling worse. Most of the time, she speaks because she's worried about who might be next. That is where I found myself. I keep thinking about the younger version of me, 19 years old, in college, trying to figure out whether I was overreacting, trying to make the calls stop, trying to make sense of why someone I had only talked to for a few days thought he had a right to my attention, my time, my body, my obedience. And I hate that I did not have someone saying to me then what I can say now. Angelica, that is not normal. That is not your fault. You said no. He should have stopped. That is the sentence I keep coming back to. He should have stopped. Not because I asked perfectly, not because I had the perfect screenshot, not because I knew how to explain it in a way everyone else would understand. He should have stopped because I said no. And when I blocked him, that should have been clear too. A block is not an invitation to make another account. A block is not a challenge. A block is not something to work around. A block means leave me alone. That sounds so obvious when I say it now, but I need people to understand how often the obvious thing gets ignored. And when it gets ignored over and over, the person being targeted starts carrying consequences that were never theirs to carry. You start asking yourself if posting publicly is worth it. You start wondering if a new account is harmless or not. You start explaining to people you love why this one person may try to reach them. You start bracing for the next time he comes back. And eventually, you get tired of pretending that is normal. And that is why this episode is not just about what happened when I was 19. It's about what continued after. It's about what I recognized when other women started speaking. It's about the difference between one uncomfortable interaction and years of being reminded that someone did not accept your boundary. Because the truth is, I don't want to be telling this story. I wish there was no story to tell. I wish I had said no at 19 and that had been the end of it. I wish I had blocked him once and never heard from him again. I wish other women had not described things that made me feel sick with recognition. But wishing does not change what happened. And staying quiet does not hold anyone accountable. So, I'm here, saying it clearly. Jon Holyoke had no right to keep contacting me after I said no. He had no right to make me feel like I owed him access to me. He had no right to keep finding ways back after I blocked him. And if other women are describing similar experiences, then people need to stop treating that like background noise. They need to listen. The thing about harassment is that people often judge it by its smallest piece. They see one message, one screenshot, one comment, one follow request, and they think they understand the whole thing. They don't. Because the message is not the whole story. The whole story is what happens to your body after enough messages have come through. It's what happens when your stomach drops before you even finish reading the name. It's what happens when you see a new account and immediately start checking the profile picture, the wording, the friends, the timing, trying to figure out if it's him again. It's what happens when your phone stops being neutral. That is one of the things that stayed with me. The way my phone felt. I know how that sounds. I know that someone who's never been through it might hear that and think it sounds dramatic. But if someone has called you over and over after you said no, if someone has left voicemails, accused you of being with other men, found new ways to reach you after being blocked, and then disappeared just long enough for you to think maybe it was over, your body learns something. It learns to brace. A notification is not just a notification anymore. A message from an unfamiliar account is not just a message. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is just the space before he comes back. And I hate that. I hate that one person's refusal to stop could make ordinary things feel unsafe. I hate that I had to think about what I posted, who could see it, who might get contacted, and whether a random account was actually random. I hate that a person I barely knew at 19 managed to take up space in my life for years because he would not respect the most basic boundary. No. That was the boundary. No. Not convince me, not try harder, not make another account, not call until I answer. No. And the fact that he did not respect that is the part I am done softening. Because for years, I made it about myself. Maybe I should have known better. Maybe I should have handled it differently. Maybe I should have saved more. Maybe I should have reported sooner. Maybe I should have been less naive. But I was 19, and I said no. That should have been enough. The responsibility was never mine to make him stop wanting access to me. The responsibility was his to stop trying to get it. That is where accountability starts. It starts with naming the behavior plainly. If someone says no and you keep pushing, that is not a misunderstanding. If someone blocks you and you make another account, that is not romance. If someone does not answer and you call over and over, that is not persistence. If someone is trying to get away from you and you keep finding ways back, that is not love. That is control. And I am not going to dress that up to make it easier to hear. What I experienced from Jon made me feel unsafe. It made me feel watched. It made me feel like my boundary only mattered if he decided it mattered. And for a long time, I carried that like it was somehow my fault for not knowing what to do with it. It wasn't my fault. I know that now. But knowing that now does not erase what it did then. It does not erase the dread. It does not erase the way I minimized myself. It does not erase the years where I treated it like some weird story from college instead of something that affected how I moved through the world. And that is why hearing other women talk hits me so hard. Because I recognized the exhaustion in their words. I recognized the feeling of being done. Done explaining, done blocking, done pretending that one more account, one more message, One more unwanted attempt was somehow small enough to ignore. And I think that's what people miss most. It's not just fear, it's fatigue. It's the exhaustion of being made responsible for your own escape over and over again. You block, and he comes back. You ignore, and he tries again. You stay quiet, and he keeps existing around the edges of your life. You speak up, and suddenly, people want to question your timing, your tone, your proof, your motive. That is how people get worn down. Not all at once, piece by piece. And after a while, you start making yourself smaller without even realizing it. You post less. You explain more. You warn people quietly. You look over your shoulder online. You learn how to make your life harder for someone else to reach, and then people act like that is normal. It is not normal. Women should not have to become experts at disappearing just to be left alone. That is one of the reasons I'm saying this now, because I refuse to keep treating my own discomfort like it was just an overreaction. I refuse to keep pretending that being contacted again and again after saying no was just some awkward thing I should have gotten over faster. And I refuse to act like other people describing similar behavior does not matter. It matters. Even if every story is different. Even if not every person wants to go public. Even if not every detail is mine to share. It matters that women have warned each other. It matters that people have said they felt uncomfortable or unsafe. It matters that the same name kept coming up. And it matters that the people affected are the ones who are left carrying the fear, the screenshots, the questions, and the consequences. For anyone listening who has lived something like this, I want to say this as plainly as I can. You don't need to have handled it perfectly for it to be real. You don't need to have saved every message. You don't need to have reported it right away. You don't need to have the cleanest timeline or the perfect words. And you don't need to keep making it smaller because someone else might be uncomfortable hearing it. I spent years doing that. I am done. What happened to me affected me. What I've seen other people describe matters. And if Jon Holyoke did not want people talking about a pattern, then he should not have behaved in ways that made so many people feel like they had to warn each other. That is the truth of it. The discomfort now is not the problem. The behavior was the problem. And for too long, too many people were left trying to manage the aftermath quietly. For years, I thought speaking about this would give it more power. I thought if I said his name, if I explained what happened, if I let people know how much it affected me, then somehow I was letting him take up space in my life all over again. So I tried to keep it small. I blocked, I ignored, I moved around it. I warned people when I felt like I had to. And I told myself that was enough. But it wasn't enough. Because silence didn't make it disappear. It only made me carry it by myself. And I am not doing that anymore. I am not carrying the blame for being young. I am not carrying the shame of not knowing what to call it sooner. I am not carrying the responsibility for his choices. I was 19. I said no. He kept pushing. That is the truth, and I am allowed to say it. I'm allowed to say that what happened made me feel unsafe. I'm allowed to say that being contacted over and over after saying no was not okay. I'm allowed to say that being found again after blocking him was not okay. I'm allowed to say that it affected me, even if I spent years trying to convince myself it didn't. And I'm allowed to hold him accountable for the way he treated me. That does not mean this episode is asking anyone to harass him, threaten him, contact him, or turn this into some online attack. Do not do that. That is not what this is. This is not about revenge. This is about telling the truth without shrinking it down just to make other people comfortable. This is about saying that what I experienced from Jon Holyoke was not some kind of harmless misunderstanding. It was not just awkward. It was not just annoying. It was not just something I should have had to laugh off, explain away, or carry quietly for years. It was repeated, unwanted contact after I said no. It was him refusing to accept a boundary. It was him making me feel like my access, my attention, my time, and my peace belonged to him if he wanted them badly enough. They did not. They never did. And when I started hearing other people describe things that sounded a little too familiar, I couldn't pretend anymore that this was only about me. Again, I'm not here to speak for anyone who has not chosen to tell her own story, but I can say that hearing other women talk about him changed something in me. It made me stop asking, was I overreacting? It made me start asking, how many other people have been made to feel this way? That is a question people should sit with. Not dismiss, not laugh off, not call drama. Sit with it. Because when multiple people are warning each other about the same person, the focus should not be on why they are finally speaking. The focus should be on what made so many of them feel like they had to warn each other in the first place. That is where accountability belongs. Not on the women who blocked, not on the women who froze, not on the women who deleted messages because they wanted them gone, not on the women who waited years to say something, not on the women who are still not ready to say anything publicly. The accountability belongs on the person who made people feel unsafe. It belongs on the person who heard no and kept going. It belongs on the person who treated a block like something to work around. It belongs on the person whose behavior made women feel like they had to document, warn, hide, change accounts, and explain themselves. That is why I'm saying this now. Because I'm done treating my own story like it has to be softer than it is. Because I'm done letting the fear of being judged decide whether I speak. Because I'm done pretending that something did not affect me just because I survived it. Surviving something does not mean it didn't hurt you. Moving on does not mean it was okay. And staying quiet does not mean you forgot. I did not forget. I remember being 19. I remember the calls. I remember the voicemails. I remember the accusations. I remember blocking him. I remember him coming back. And I remember the feeling of realizing that my no had never mattered to him. That is what I am taking back now. My no mattered. It mattered then. It matters now. And if you're listening to this and have ever been made to feel like your no was optional, I want you to hear me. It was not optional. You did not owe access. You did not owe politeness. You did not owe more chances. You did not owe a perfect explanation. You were allowed to be done. You were allowed to walk away. You were allowed to block. You were allowed to feel afraid, angry, confused, embarrassed, or exhausted. And you were allowed to speak when you were ready, even if ready came years later. If this episode brought something up for you, please take care of yourself listening. Step away if you need to. Drink water. Message someone safe. Sit somewhere quiet and remind yourself where you are now. Message me if you need to. My inbox is always open. If you're dealing with stalking, harassment, threats, or repeated unwanted contact, document what you can. Save screenshots, save voicemails, write down dates when you can. Tell someone you trust. Reach out to local support services, advocacy groups, or law enforcement if you feel safe doing so. And if you're in immediate danger, call emergency services. You do not have to handle it alone. To anyone who has shared something with me privately, thank you. To anyone who has warned someone else, thank you. To anyone who is still not ready to speak, I understand. Your story is still yours. You do not have to hand it over before you are ready. You do not have to prove your pain to strangers. You do not have to be public for what happened to matter. For me, this episode is part of taking my voice back. It does not undo what happened. It does not make me 19 again with someone beside me saying, "You're right, this is not okay." But it lets me say it now. I was right to feel uncomfortable. I was right to say no. I was right to block him. I was right to be exhausted when he kept coming back. And I am right to say that Jon Holyoke's behavior toward me was not okay. As always, thank you for listening and supporting my small podcast. I know this episode is different. It is personal. It is close to home. And honestly, it is one of the hardest things I've ever had to put into words. But Angelica's Morbid Minutes has always been about people whose stories deserve to be heard. Tonight, that includes mine. And if multiple people are warning you about the same behavior, the right response is not to roll your eyes. It is to listen. Until then, lock your doors, hold the people you love close, and remember this: you do not need a perfect story to deserve to be believed. And you do not need anyone's permission to trust yourself.